Okay, welcome to lecture 2 of Beowulf. The first one was an introductory lecture. We're going to go right into the poem. And I'm going to use Tolkien's commentary on the poem Beowulf as an aid to try to make some sense of this poem, which again is a difficult poem to interpret. But I want to say something about what the text we're reading, which is Seamus Heaney's translation of the poem. This is what you should have. We're actually reading a modern translation of an Old English poem. So it's a poem based upon a poem, and it's to be read. The translation we're reading is to be read as a poem, as a literary text, right? Standing kind of on its own. The Old English is there to give us a sense of what the original was like. Focus is on and we're going to be reading the modern translation as a work of literary art. Tolkien wrote a translation in prose which was not intended to stand on its own, but was meant for his students that he taught in a course in Old English literature. So they would be reading the Old English poem and using his prose translation as a kind of crib, as a kind of cheat sheet, to make sure that they're getting the right meaning. Very different purposes. And the commentary was developed as a way of helping students understand the poem as well. It was only published, this translation, and its accompanying published in 2014, so it's only been around 6 years. At any rate, we're going to jump right into it and begin with the beginning, which is a good place to start. So, it begins. Tolkien translates it lo, which has a more poetic and sort of look, see. So is more pedestrian. It could suggest a kind of fact. Look, here's the historical past. So this happened, but also right? So something important here. I think both meanings are in play, or perhaps all three. So the Spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There's a lot packed into there. The Spear Danes, Danish warriors who are pagan warriors. They have a particular code that's not Christian. They were in days gone by, not merely a historical past. They're not merely dead. The culture that they lived in is also gone. Right? So again, we already have the distance between the Beowulf poet and the culture he's talking about, which is a pagan world that has been replaced by Christianity. We have heard. So the sense of hearing, oral tradition perhaps, it's based upon oral tradition. Perhaps they've even heard from their grandfather or father who knew one of these figures. Not too distant past. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaign, courage and greatness with the heroism. This is a positive representation of paganism by a Christian. That should be mentioned. Okay, so the beginning of this poem mentions Beo, gives a kind of historical account of Beo and Beowulf. First of all, I want to mention the mentioning of Lord of Life at line 13 or so, 14, 13, I think. Tolkien, in his commentary, says this is a kenning for God, and it's probably a piece of poetic diction. What does he mean by that? Well, what he means by that is that the poem is a kind of, the word that's used there has a kind of history, and he's using it here in this context to the poet himself, right? Using it in a kind of as a kind of interpolation, or a kind of think about it from the Christian standpoint. God always is. Now that may be not true. That might not have been recognized by Beowulf himself. But the presence of the Lord Almighty. So the Lord of life. The word kenning, Kenning, means it's a figure of speech in Old English. It's a compound construction that's not to be meant to be taken literally. What Tolkien says is the Beowulf was not composed in the form we now have it until much Christian verse had been written after Kedmon's time. And I posted Kedmon's hymn, which is probably around between 660 and 680, composed between 660 and 680. So you should pull that up. And I'll just read the modern English translation. Now let me praise the keeper of heaven's kingdom, the might of the Creator and his thought, the work of the Father of glory, how each of wonders the eternal Lord established in the beginning. Notice all the names for God. Creator, he upholds things. He first created the sons of men. Heaven is a roof, the holy Creator, then Middle Earth, the keeper of mankind, the eternal Lord afterwards made the earth for men, the Almighty Lord. In the beginning, Kedmon sang this song. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a moment because it's important. It's early, but the Lord of life is a reference to that Christian idea. Again, it's spoken by the Beowulf poet, not by Beowulf, who would not understand this. Okay, the name Beo is introduced at line 14, and we have a kind of history here, a quasi-history. What's interesting is that Tolkien, who was a scholar of the period, read everything, says that the name only occurs in Old English in this poem. So it's not a historical figure. Beowulf, Tolkien says, the bear man, the giant killer, comes from a different world fairy story. So what do we make of this? Well, Beowulf is not a historical figure. He's a legend. And therefore, we could say something like Beowulf is the ideal warrior. So this is an idealized form. And that's why you have mythological figures like Grendel and Grendel's mother and the dragon. This sort of quasi-history continues, and Tolkien says about this period that's being presented, Hrothgar's people, and Beowulf. He says the dramatic time of Beowulf is the 6th century, with a background of dimmer and older traditions of the 5th century. So he goes on in a very important commentary, I think, that we should keep in mind, to say that he says the author of Beowulf was not a heathen, but he wrote in a time when the pagan past was still very near, so near that not only some facts were remembered, but moods and motives also. So the presence of the sensibility, even though the practice of being a warrior is gone, the feelings of those things, they die hard. The source was no doubt primarily oral and literary, actual mention and description of things in lays and stories. There must have been far more visible archaeological evidence in his day in England than now. We have Stonehenge and Avebury Circle and stone circles, and we have figures like the white horse, 5 of them in south Other figures um, um, that are present, sort of etched out of the rock. You can see them in hills for miles away. He says there must have been more. We can imagine temples, perhaps druid temples, perhaps certainly halls, right? Maybe very much like Heorot Hall, that are gone. So that the Beowulf poet would have known of these archaeological things. They're gone for us. And when Tolkien was writing in 1930s. So the pagan is present in generations before, very close to the author of Beowulf. The skill in the first 100 lines, Beowulf, Tolkien says, came out of the unknown beyond the great sea and returned into it. A miraculous intrusion in history which nonetheless left real historical effects. These are figures that are legendary, that nevertheless present themselves in history in some way. So we get, again, the sense of depth. All right. Hrothgar and Heorot Hall are mentioned. The Mead Hall. This is the place where gifts were given. It's the place where all the communal feasts were held. It's the place where the community comes together with king and warriors. The monster's significance in the presence of this. It's some invasion of the heart of community. It's not this enemy that's seeking to destroy Denmark, the Danish. This is an enemy from within that's going to destroy it from within. So who is Grendel? Grendel is a powerful demon from the realm of the undead, Tolkien says, midway between human and demonic. Darkness goes with them. Their secret and malicious purposes are unfathomable, except that they are perilous and hostile to men beyond hope of peace. They are described, Grendel is described as the killer instinct unleashed among in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. I would suggest we have a good idea of what this is. The pagan warrior code is built upon vengeance. You kill my kin, I kill yours. Right? You unleash that. And that becomes anger and rage, and that's very hard to control and would feel like a power from without outside, and sometimes does feel like that. It would be a spirit that inhabits a person. It can frequently wind up, if you engage in violent acts and are trained to do violent acts, what's to stop you from attacking your kin then? I think this is what the Grendel represents. We see this as one of the worst elements of medieval Christianity. When the Crusades were over, the knights came back and just raped women and pillaged the peasants. And it was like bloodlust run rampant, right? Could not be turned off once it was unleashed. So I think that's what this is. But there it's kind of an aberration in Christianity. Here it's a crisis from within the code itself, because the code demands vengeance. So Beowulf appears in some way to resolve that. But the Danes cannot resolve it at this point. The motives. Well, Grendel hates the clear song of a skilled poet, telling with mastery of man's beginning how the Almighty had made the earth a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor he set the sun and the moon to be earth's lamplight, lanterns for men, and filled the broad lap of the world with branches and leaves, and quickened life in every other thing that moved. This sounds much like So Grendel is so despicable that he kills kin and even hates the origins of creation. Caedmon's hymn and this reference to the skilled singer who would sing, in the mead hall of the goodness of the natural world is a positive point of contact between paganism and Christianity, both of which celebrate the natural world, its beauties, as something good and created good, and to be enjoyed as something good. The Druids worshiped nature. So the Druidical love of the natural world is brought. It could be one of the things that was taken lock, stock, and barrel from paganism and converted into Christianity. There's a lot of evidence for this in the church, the cathedrals in England. So that pagan love of nature finds a kind of cognate form in the book of Genesis. And that's what Caedmon's hymn is a reflection of. Genesis, right? The book of Genesis, the creation of the world. So this is a point of positive context. He's linked with Cain's clan, which shows that the poet knows the Old Testament and therefore is a Christian. And it results then in dissipation of unity from in the mead hall. One can see why this is the case. Lock the doors. No enemy can get in there. Men wake up to death in the mead hall. You don't know who does it. You're not going to sleep there. Right? That's aroused. So the importance of the monster in Heorot Hall, Beowulf attributes a kind of intrigue and treachery of a political nature. He also says that Heorot Hall, maybe I'll talk about that a little later, but I'll talk about that in a moment. The method of killing. Grendel butchers the men after drinking, takes them to his lair, then brings them back slaughtered. The killing is not described, but only the corpse is seen as the aftermath. This is very shadowy. Who knows what's going on here? It's an allegory. Secretive, unknown, duplicitous. The monster, the darkness and treachery of a soul. We can't see that darkness and treachery. We can see its aftermath in the murder of kin. The poet has a marvelous description, and Seamus Heaney translates this quite nicely, trying to preserve the alliterative verse. Their wassail, this is at lines 128 and 129. Their wassail was over, they wept to heaven. The W's, that's the form of alliterative verse, the repetition of the W's. And mourned under mourning. The repetition of the M's. Mourned under mourning is a beautifully sad phrase. Mourning is usually said mourning. They mourned under mourning. So the Old English reads, there was after Wista, woth up a hofen, Mitchell Morgan's wig. So you see the poem, Heaney's translation is an attempt to reproduce that alliterative form. So what's the other effect of this? Well, Hrothgar's rule falters. The hall empties. The gravity of the treachery is such that what's referred to in 153 as the unrelenting foe. Hrothgar's power is gone. Why? Because the warriors are no longer there to protect each other. This is a dangerous situation, right? Any enemy can come in and destroy one by one. Uh, Grendel is said, it says he took over Heorot Hall in 166. The importance of the monster in Heorot Hall is key. Apparently, Heorot historically had both religious and political significance. It had, in its ancient traditions about Skildings, a special association with the heathen cult. It was the struggle for the sacred site that so embittered the strife. So Grendel's presence reveals a kind of inherent evil of paganism with what? It's turned to human sacrifice. So when the poet says something like, he says, their response was to turn to pagan idols, right? That was the only thing they could do. So he says, sometimes at pagan shrines they vowed offerings to idols, swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. That was their way, their heathenish hope. Deep in their hearts they remembered hell. Okay, so the sense here that Heorot was associated with perhaps human sacrifice. This is clearly a ritual presented that was present in Druid and pagan times of this period. It's almost the Beowulf doesn't even want to mention it explicitly. Everybody understands. Pagan, that was human sacrifice. It would have been to one's kin. So you've got a double folding of killing, the killing of kin because of vengeance unleashed among in-laws, but the killing of kin to assuage an angry god. So it's a double killing, and this is desperate, right? So he goes on. The Almighty Judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high King of the world, was unknown to them. The reason there's human sacrifice is because the sacrifice of Christ was not known, which takes the place of human sacrifice. So here's what's interesting, and I want to suggest this as a theory. Tolkien doesn't mention this explicitly, but this is my theory. That while there was no martyrdom, there was no history of martyrdom within the conversion of pagan Norse culture, like there was in the South, there was human sacrifice. It was replaced immediately when they saw the image of the crucifix and the God-man who died to end all death. So they immediately saw their God and a human sacrifice that would So when the Beowulf poet says this, they didn't know of Christianity. That's why they turned to human sacrifice. The one sacrifice of Christ solves all of these things, and there does seem to be an almost instantaneous stoppage of human sacrifice. So the poet is like saying that's what they did. How could they do otherwise? And he goes on, "Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble has to thrust his soul in the fire's embrace, forfeiting help." Right? It's necessary. It's futile because it's not going to solve the problem. He has nowhere to turn. Cursed is he. It's not damned. This is sorrowful. It's to be in this predicament of being without hope as a pagan. That's what this Beowulf poet is saying. That's a very different tone from damning them and condemning them. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. True of Christianity, perhaps maybe even true of a good pagan. They can be forgiven for this, perhaps. So this is a remarkable passage, one of the most important passages in the poem. And again, the way in which the desperate aspects of paganism are pitied by this poet rather than attacked. Again, it's almost to wage hell. It's futile, vain, but the Beowulf poet recognizes that without Christianity, that's what people are going to do. It's kind of sadness and horror, I think, for the suffering of pagan hopelessness. That's the tone there in this. The representation of also of Grendel as a fiend of hell. The Beyond on Hela is a phrase from the Old English. Mortal can be slain, must be slain. They occupy a kind of ambiguous realm. They have a body, but with spiritual power. And Tolkien's commentary is interesting. He says that whether Fionn on Hela is due to a kind of half-theological notion that one of the cursed things of misshapen human form, being damned, carry their hell ever with them in their hearts and spirits, or whether it is due to taking over a Christian phrase carelessly, fiend or devil, is difficult to decide. The latter would demand that Christian phraseology was already well developed and fixed when Beowulf was written. In Middle English, Fionn in hell is still used just as devil. So one gets the sense that Grendel, for a pagan, would be associated with monsters and chaos and evil that disrupts unity and peace. For the Christian, with Satan, right? Demonic forces that also disrupt unity. So there's that contact that I mentioned in the first lecture. Both the good pagan and the good Christian would be opposed to this force of evil, which hates the goodness of creation and is murderous and ultimately seeks death and destruction at a primordial level, enough to shake the very fabric of a culture. Tolkien said, where do monsters come in? How can they be equated with the scriptural account of antiquity? He saw the parallel between the legendary strife of men of old with these implacable, misshapen enemies lurking in dark dens, and the strife of Christians with the fallen devils of hell. So, again, there's positive points of contact between the pagan and Christian, and negative. What's interesting is the poem puts the positive right up front at the beginning and kind of marginalizes it. And now it's the implacable feud between the monsters and this Beowulf figure that's at the heart of the poem. And it loses that overarching Christian or even pagan sense. Human against evil, just stripped down and bare. A very interesting decision on the part of the Beowulf poet to show that basic evil predicament, at least maybe in terms of belief, has changed, but existentially, in terms of living and dealing with evil, there's a similar idea there. There's a similar experience there. You can't negotiate with Grendel. Again, the reference to the Christian God here, Tolkien says about the poet that he did not belong to the part of hero, northern or classical, to perdition. So this poet, probably a priest, was much more liberal in his thinking than perhaps his contemporaries, and would be seen in that kind of context. Would see the pagans in that kind of context as noble. Okay. So at line 2. Around 258, 250, maybe a little bit earlier. We have the entrance of Beowulf and his men from Geatland. They're noble. They're great figures. The language here is elevated. The formal speech matches the gravity of the hero. He is, within pagan culture, a counter to Grendel and the pagan response to evil. Right? He will not kill Kin. He begins speaking around 260 or so. He's a man of great speech. The poet says he unlocked his word hoard at 258. So he's got a treasure of words. But his name is only given at 343, almost 100 lines into his entrance. Beowulf is my name, he says. His opening proposal is a promise, and it's about he comes to battle Grendel. This is a very important point that I want to stress. He does not promise to kill Grendel. He says the outcome will be a just judgment of God. And here the interpolation of the word God gives the sense of Beowulf's alliance with God against Grendel, but unknown to him, right? The Christian poet would have seen him as prefiguring Christianity. But the Beowulf is unaware of that. There is no indication that the victory is just. Merely that whatever happens must be accepted as just judgment. It's very important. Beowulf isn't claiming to be superior in any way. It's not a moral thing for him. Also fate is mentioned. fate must go as it must. So this is a point of contact. What might be called fate by a pagan would be the work of the Almighty God, the Christian God, for the Christian. Another point of contact here. So this Hrothgar is gladdened that holy God hath sent him to us in his mercy against the terror of Grendel, right? But again, that Hrothgar seems to know more, have more. Tolkien has at various points suggested that Hrothgar might have been an addition by a later poet to the manuscript, that the Beowulf poet had not introduced. So it's a kind of a later editor might have interpolated these references to a Christian God. This introduces Hrothgar's major counselor, Unferth. When the major counselor starts to attack a person who offers to come in to help Grendel, you must be worried about this character. Unferth unloosed a spell for creating strife. A spell for creating strife. Tolkien's translation is a spell to bring forth strife, so almost exactly identical. He tries to undermine Beowulf by questioning his deeds. Unferth, Tolkien's commentary says this about him. Unferth, the word Unferth means unpeace or quarrel. So his name means quarrel. The thing that he is a quarrel. And the first thing we hear of him is that he unloosed a spell for the creating of strife. His character is imbued with envy, and his function, he has a knowledge of men and realms, are made the machinery by which we get further information to complete. So he says the name was made for the figure, a sinister figure in the renowned court of Heorot. This is all Tolkien. He's a literary relative of these wicked counselors that have the ear of aged kings. His criticism or lie about Beowulf is intended to be heard by Hrothgar to undermine Beowulf. Tolkien describes him as envious, intelligent, malicious, worm-tongued. So any of you who are interested or know anything about the Lord of the Rings knows that the counselor to what's his name? The King of Rohan. I've forgotten his name now. Is Grima Wormtongue. What is his name? I can't remember the king. The king. It's a terrible thing. I can't remember his name. He's a great figure in the Lord of the Rings, in the second of the third installment of books. Theoden is his name, King Theoden. So Grima Wormtongue is in Lord of the Rings is modeled after this guy. Again, Tolkien's commentary, written about 10 years before the Lord of the Rings, describes Unferth as worm-tongued. He wears a mask, a grima. Grima means what? Mask. Worm-tongue, grima worm-tongue, right? Mask of a worm-tongue. He's a charlatan. This is one clearly influences the writing of Lord of the Rings. There are more. I'm not going to talk about them. That was I took a whole course to do that. So perhaps I'll teach the Tolkien class at FAU someday at the Honors College in the future. If I'm back there, we'll see. it's at this point that 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 Beowulf then responds. Unferth, we have good reason for Unferth to worry about Beowulf challenging Grendel, because Beowulf accuses Unferth of he says, "You killed your own kith and kin. So for all your cleverness and quick tongue, you will suffer damnation in the depths of hell." So if Grendel is associated with killing of kin as a force, Unferth is a participant in that in some way. We see the conflict immediately between persons, between Unferth and Beowulf. That's on the personal level, on the human level. On the spiritual level, this is a deeper battle. And again, it's a, how will I say it? It's a kind of it's symbol. It's a symbol. Tolkien here then comments and says that the Beowulf poet's originality lies in making the Grendel element central and linking it with Hera. Play in a room through the windows of which a distant view can be seen over a large part of the English tradition about the world and their original home. So he claims that the poet's audience would have been familiar with the material, and the literary treatment of it, presents obstacles. We're unfamiliar with the subject. We're unfamiliar with the literary forms. So the introduction of the feasting and the drinking party, right after Beowulf's boast. Let me see if I should probably read the formal boast. Let me introduce the context first. Queen Wealhtheow comes in, thanks God for granting her wish that a deliverer she could believe in would arrive to ease their afflictions. Right, so she comes around and passes a goblet, right, which would be a sign of drawing Beowulf into the unity of her own of the warriors there. So it's an act of bringing him in, and it's here that Beowulf pronounces his formal boast. Often called words. It's at line 632. I had a fixed purpose when I put to sea. As I sat in the boat with my band of men, I meant to perform to the uttermost what your people wanted, or perish in the attempt in the fiend's clutches. And I shall fulfill that purpose, prove myself with the proud deed, or meet my death here in the mead hall. This formal boast was by Beowulf the Geat, pleased the lady well, and she went to sit by Hrothgar, regal and arrayed with gold. Notice that he says, I will fight, I will defeat the enemy or die trying. He does not promise to kill Grendel. Very, very important. I can't stress it enough. And it's here that merriment returns to Harrenhal. Beowulf is made the guard of the house at the end of the scene. But the poet now at 661 and 702 gives a lengthy commentary on the sense of fate. God's providence, he says, determines the outcome. Some of God's names: King of Glory, Lord, Divine Lord, Almighty God. So the question of fate, right? And the problem this presents in relation to Christianity, I think, is fairly important. A couple of other confluences. The Geat placed complete trust in his strength of limb and the Lord's favor. So he has courage, the strength of his limb, and the Lord's favor. Well, probably not the God of the Christian. The poet, however, interpolates his own idea and says, the Lord was weaving a victory on his war loom for the weather Geat. The truth is clear. Almighty God rules over mankind and always has. This seems to suggest that Beowulf, although he doesn't know it, is placing trust in what's called fate, right? But that fate, because he's allied with evil and chaos, it's not positively known as a Christian God, but it is cognate with that God. So from a Christian standpoint, God is always providential, even among pagans, right? Even among those who don't believe in God. God's goodness and God's presence is always there. So that is what is being said by this poet. And again, bending over backwards to make Beowulf, to align Beowulf, whether he though he does not know it, with the Christian God. Again, simply being opposed to the evil that's opposed to God would suggest this, but to believe in something called fate, right, suggests a kind of overarching principle. This idea of fate, then, Tolkien translates this idea of fate that saves a person not doomed to die when his valor fails not. Tolkien suggests this is more like fortune. Fortune saves an undaunted man when his vigor does not fail. So while the Haney translation suggests a kind of physical courage or physical prowess, Tolkien suggests that it's courage or will that's the key, the combative spirit of proud individuals. He goes on, so a resolute man by the grace of God may well escape unharmed. So the rendering of fate links it with a kind of failure to resist. But if one believes in fortune, well, then one might wind up getting a favorable one. So Tolkien translates this as God works through men and their powers, which God also provides. So I think there's a key moment, a key translation of these ideas. I'm going to read it from Tolkien's commentary. He says that he is dealing with a problem much simpler from the point of view of literary handling, addressing a Christian audience, members of a religion established many hundreds of years, that was not concerned with its foundations, but with an execrance of heresy. So the author of Beowulf is writing for a society in which Christianity had not long been established. Few generations perhaps, but kings and nobles knew and honored the names of their pagan ancestors not so far back. Their scops and files remembered and recounted still histories and tales, greater and less, out of a time of pure heathenism. Christianity had done little in the noble class to soften the sentiments behind the code of honor. Physical courage and sheer strength of body, pride and a fierce individualism which would brook no humiliation, and the duty of revenge were the chief features of the man of honor. The fundamental tenets of one God, creator and ruler of all, inscrutable maybe in his decisions in this or that case, but still benevolent to men and each man, and of life hereafter, had not dethroned fate, inexorable, unconcerned with good or ill in deeds, and the opposition to it of unbending pride, self-will, with the reward of dome, glory, the praise of men, not of the judge, now or hereafter. Fate and glory never have, of course, been completely dethroned, but it is a matter of degree. So this is an interesting point, I think, that's being made, that, again, while the pagan warrior code is gone, its sentiments take centuries to be eradicated. And as Tolkien says, never eradicated. There's this sense of honor and desire for glory that has nothing to do with the Christian God. That's a kind of mortal idea. If you're interested in a marvelous historical novel that tries to articulate or tries to dramatize a particular set of characters who are Christian but nevertheless think like pagans, and what it takes for them for their wills, their pagan, unyielding will, to be transformed into a Christian will. It's written by a woman named Sigrid Undset. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1927, and the show is called Gunnar's Daughter. So the figure that Undset picks is a woman who has tremendous unyielding will, what it takes for her for that desire for vengeance to be transformed into forgiveness. It's a powerful novel. I've taught it before in literature courses. It's deeply linked with the Beowulf story. It would have fit this course. I probably could have used that instead of Wise Blood, but that be it. But you can read it anyway. The sense of opposed to the monsters. Tolkien says the philosophical principle with Old Norse, the essential hostility of the monsters, the human divine. He says Beowulf is all we have of it. We don't have it pure and simple, unfused with Christian ideas. So this is our only glimpse into this picture of Old English, of the English pagan culture, which resisted the evil. It's mediated through Christianity, so we have to kind of see beyond the Christian to get to it. So an interesting point, I think, again, that Tolkien makes here. Beowulf's battle with Grendel is characterized as God cursed, his eyes flame more than light. His glee was demonic. He's a captain of evil. He's a hell serf. These are all characterizations over 60 or 70 lines from 710 to 835. Notice the battle is described at 7:49. We see the effects. We don't see anything that's going on, really. Benches crashing. One precise action. Beowulf has a hand grip on Grendel. And the poet says this at line 800. There was something they could not have known at the time, that no blade on earth, no blacksmith's art could ever damage their demon opponent. He had conjured the harm from the cutting edge of every weapon. Going away out of this world in the days of his life, agony to him, and his alien spirit would travel far into the fiend's keeping. So the defeat is physical, but not through weapons. Its meaning only glimpsed. Grendel dies by having his arm ripped out. What's the meaning of this? How can we interpret this symbolically? Well, somehow Beowulf does not fight through weapons, but through refusal to take weapons, he rips off the arm that would wield the weapon. Right? He defeats the spirit of killing of kin by just almost standing there. And again, it's allegorical or symbolic, if you will. It's a physical event, but it has deeper spiritual meaning. So Grendel destroyed, not with arms, that would only perpetuate the violence, right? It's ripping off the source. It can't be defeated by arms, right? It can only be defeated by the kind of renunciation of arms, but standing up physically to it. And you can see why some people think of this as a kind of Christ-like figure. And the effect of this at line 829. Beowulf had healed and relieved a huge distress, unremitting humiliations, the hard fate they'd been forced to undergo, no small affliction. Clear proof of this could be seen in the hand the hero displayed high up near the roof, the whole of Grendel's shoulder and arm, his awesome grasp. And again, it's symbolic of defeating the killing of kin, even with courage. With courage. You see if I can. Yeah. Okay, let's move. Well, I think I'll finish with. I think it follows quite quickly that Beowulf's heroic deeds are in song as a traditional singer deeply schooled in the lore of the past. So this moves directly into the tale of Sigemund, the dragon slayer. What's its characteristics? The past that's remote and gone, sense of heroism but lost, the sense that evil outstrips good, that victory brings anxiety and doom. So how does this color Beowulf's victory? Well, it's only temporary. I mean, don't you think that this should last longer? This poem is not about victory. It's about the long defeat. So the celebration here has a foreboding sense to it. Hrothgar responds, thanks to the Almighty Father, gives gifts to Beowulf. Feasting, returns to Heorot. But there's a song that's sung, another song of loss, that kind of undermines the mirth. Even as there are high times of all benches drinking and eating, the sense of loss is present. After the feast, there's impending doom. How could they know fate, the grim shape of things to come? Then it became clear, obvious to everyone once the fight was over, that an avenger lurked and was still alive, grimly biding time. Grendel's mother, monstrous Hellbride, brooded on her wrongs. Her genealogy is given. She's an offspring of Cain, but unclear, shrouded in mystery. The allegory, of course, is fratricide, but she's the mother of fratricide. The mother of things is always worse than just the thing itself, I guess. So I'm going to stop there since this is about an hour of this lecture, and I will pick up at around line 1279 or so with Grendel's mother invading Heorot Hall.